Do you ever have to talk about big trends affecting your industry or sector? Today I'm going to train you in a structure you can use that sounds really great. And for the examples, I'm going to use sentences that professionals listening to this podcast have sent in. Should be fun. Let's crack on. Welcome back to Confident Business English. You're here with me, Anna, your host and neuro-language coach. So the inspiration for this episode came from some work that I was doing with a client. They work in the renewable energy sector, and we were talking about big changes across the sector. And what I really noticed was there was definitely some room for improvement in how they were expressing it. I could understand everything that they were saying. It's just that I thought, well, if we just use this phrase here and this little word there, it would sound even better. Being confident talking about trends in English can help you in many ways, especially, of course, if this is part of your day-to-day job. Perhaps you have to communicate with clients or people in the wider organization. But also, for example, if you're going to interviews and you have to give them your take on what's going on in the industry and sector as well. There's many ways to express trends. So what I've done is pick out a really useful structure that you can come back to time and time again. And I hope that helps you internalize this one rather than just overwhelming you with lots of different structures. Let me introduce the structure to you then, and we'll go through loads of different examples. And as I said, these are really interesting because they're things that you, the listeners, have sent into me about your sectors, and they're super varied. So we'll get into that in a second. The structure is this. In my sector, there has been, or there is, it depends how you want to express it. In my sector, there has been a big shift away from something towards something else. Another way that you could say it. In my sector, there has been a lot of movement away from X towards Y. If we wanted to add a little bit more to that and express the reason, it could be, in my sector, there is a clear trend away from X towards Y. This is being driven by, and then you can add in the main factor driving the change. Let me just highlight a couple of important things there. You're going to hear that noun shift a lot today. There's been a big shift. Also, you might use it in the verb as well. Things are shifting. And it's a very common piece of vocabulary when we're talking about high-level changes. You might also notice those prepositions. In my sector, there's been a big shift away from, and away from here, it's about giving distance towards something else. So these prepositions are talking about directions in a figurative sense, of course. For example, you could say, let's imagine in the retail industry, there's been quite a big shift away from brick and mortar stores, and by brick and mortar I just mean physical stores, towards e-commerce and digital marketplaces. I have to say that I'm not really part of that trend because I still really like going to the shop. I guess I don't know what generation that makes me, but I'm a millennial, but I think I don't really fit in that category because I don't actually do a huge amount of shopping online, so I don't know what category you'd want to put me in if you work in retail. Notice how you've got a little bit of flexibility there to make that shift bigger or smaller. There has been a big, huge, massive shift, or there's been a slight shift, or quite a big shift, which definitely wouldn't be the same level as huge. So you can play around with that a little bit as well. Moving into the food and beverage industry, I would definitely say that, for example, in Spain, where I lived in the UK, there's been a clear trend away from processed foods towards more organic and plant-based alternatives. I have to say there's also been a big shift towards protein products. And actually, I don't buy into that at all. I don't know what you think, but I think it's an absolute massive fad. FAD, this is a very colloquial way to say just a passing trend, something that people jump on the bandwagon and everyone's like, everyone needs to eat more protein. Recently, I was actually listening to a podcast and they had a guest on there called Tim Spector. He's a professor at King's College London and he's also an honorary consultant physician in a hospital in London. And what he was saying is it's not protein that we need or that we have a lack of, it's actually fiber. If you're interested in that, definitely check out his work that he does. Let's move on swiftly because I could go on about that all day. It drives my partner mad. I'm going to read some of your examples. Let's continue consolidating this structure. I'm going to group some of these together, and I'm going to start with Hayato, and my apologies if at any point I mispronounce any of your names that are on the list today. Hello, Hayato. Thank you so much for sending in your sentence. And you are a professional in procurement in the pharmaceutical industry. You said, in my sector, there's been a lot of movement away from gasoline cars, which is now shifting towards electric vehicles, especially for sales activities. This was also backed up by Jenny. Hi, Jenny. You are an HR business partner in the automotive industry. And you said also in your sector, there has been a big shift away from gasoline and diesel engines to electric vehicles. Ekaterina, I hope I pronounced that correctly. Thank you so much for sending in your sentence. You are an industrial engineer, and you said that there's been a shift away from long-term investments in sustainable technologies like carbon capture towards more traditional machinery. And Theodora, you're an electrical design engineer in the aerospace industry. You said that in your sector, there's been a big shift away from being experienced in one specific domain towards multitasking with entry-level knowledge. That sounds slightly worrying, Theodora, especially as you work in the aerospace industry, but I'm going to assume that it's a positive trend. That's the only thing from these sentences. I haven't been able to get the context of whether it's bad or not, but let's hope that's a positive trend. Another point I'd like to mention here about the structure, when we're saying there has been a big shift away from, you've got two different options that you could use there. You could either use a noun or you could use the verb in gerund, like Theodora did here. In my sector, there's been a big shift away from being experienced, or you could rephrase that to use the noun. In my sector, there's been a big shift away from experience in one specific domain. So you've got two options, verb in gerund or the noun. I'm going to move on to some digital ones now here. Uche, who is a data scientist in real estate. In my sector, there's been a lot of movement away from Python or Excel, which is now shifting towards AI. Shifting towards becoming closer, away from distance towards closer. Deborah, who is an officer at the Italian Coast Guard. Wow, that sounds cool. You said, in my sector, there has been a big shift away from paper documents to digital ones. Flora, you are an industrial engineer and you work in an information technology company. Thank you for your sentence. You said, in my sector, there has been a lot of movement away from waterfall, which is a methodology for project management, which is now shifting towards agile. I'm sure that some of you listening to this are well aware of that because I know that there's a lot of project managers listening to the podcast. Andres is up next. You're a business administrator and you work in the fastening and fixings sector. In my sector, there has been a big shift away from manual quality control to automated inspection systems using sensorial technology and data analytics. Sounds fancy. Let's get in a couple more to finish. And again, what we're doing is we're just consolidating this structure even more. I'm going to come to Lydia, who is a communication advisor. And you said that you help companies and leaders communicate their visions, beliefs, and strategies. Oh, that sounds like a great job, actually. It sounds super fun. Lydia, I'm sure you love it. The human-centric leadership model requires a new way for leaders to communicate. There's been a big shift away from top-down and one-way communication to communication based on empathy, authenticity, and participation. Let's focus on a little bit of the vocabulary that Lydia used there. So she said top-down communication, which is essentially that the leadership leads the communication and it trickles down from the top. And then the opposite approach, and you might have heard this phrase before, is bottom-up. And that's where staff and employees contribute to the communication and decision-making. Let's finish off with some examples in healthcare. I'm going to go to Claire. You said you're senior head of clinic physicians, and you said there's been a really rapid shift. So here we're talking about speed, particularly in terms of medical roles, moving away from only having a clinical standpoint towards the need of enlarging your management and leadership skills. The only thing I'm going to suggest there, Claire, is rather than enlarging your skills, actually the most common way to express that is about broadening or widening. But I actually prefer broadening. It's more common when we're talking about our skills. Thank you so much to all of you that sent in those sentences. And I hope it was interesting for you to hear those different real life examples as well of the other professionals that are listening to this podcast. My question now goes over to you to have a think about. What big shifts are you seeing in your industry? What is there a big shift away from? What is there a clear trend towards? Have a think about it, write it down, and practice it if this is something that would be really useful for you to know on autopilot. I'll be sending out a little recap with some of the structures I've used in the newsletter this week, so if you want to get that, make sure you sign up and become a free member of Confident Business English. You'll also be able to access the transcript for today as well, in case you want to go back through it step by step. Thank you, as always, for squeezing me into your very busy day. I really hope that you took something away from that, and I look forward to speaking to you again next week. Bye-bye.